We continue our coverage on the plight of whistleblowers. We're joined now by Professor Alex van der Heever from the Wits School of Governance. Prof, thank you so much indeed for joining us this morning. I mean, the plight of whistleblowers in South Africa, tells a tale on its own, given the fact that, today we look back on the life of Babita Deokaran, but after that we had more assassinations of people who are blowing the whistles on various other issues. For example, if we look at Pamela Mabini in the Eastern Cape, and right here in Ekurhuleni, that of the forensic auditor.
Yes, so it's important to note that in the case of Babita Deokaran and Impol, they were actually performing their job. They weren't whistleblowing. The information was being reported into their own organizations and going up the chain, which suggests that these assassinations are very closely linked to the leadership of the province. And I think that that's where we have to look. This is what we're seeing at the moment, is that people who are targeted internally like this are actually performing or functioning within a hierarchy, within a provincial hierarchy or within a municipality. And because their information is kind of confidential at that point in time, they haven't gone to the newspaper or anything, assassinating them has some value for the criminals operating, the syndicates operating within the provincial and municipal governments. So I think that we have to take into account, when we start to look at all the evidence and how widespread this is that many parts of the state are in fact primed for systemic corruption and the actions of syndicates, and the accountability mechanisms themselves are targeted. This extends to whistleblowers as well, who, when they are frustrated and realize that they can't go up the chain, make information public, and then they are themselves a target. But often they could be assassinated, or they could be just disciplined and removed from the organization itself. So it's what we're seeing at the moment is systemic, and it needs to be rooted out from the top.
And isn't that why we see some of the governance structures in some of these institutions, where you have such rampant corruption taking place, completely broken, because those who try to speak out against, some of these corruption or corrupt deeds that are taking place are simply wiped out?
So it's important to note that I refer to this as top-down corruption. Effectively, it's another way of referring to state capture. And that is where the top structures are effectively captured, and they close down the accountability mechanisms of the departments, which mean that the laws don't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And it also means that your key actors that are meant to be part of these accountability structures are extremely vulnerable, because they're not protected by their organization. They're not protected by the top structures. Quite the opposite. They are at risk from them. If you look at the Babita Deokaran story, you see it was important that kind of information was revealed, because it was in the laptop and in a cell phone, and that got into the hands of News 24 and Jeff Wicks. And what that allowed somebody to see is exactly how it was occurring. She reported upward to the chief financial officer what she had discovered. She closed the contract. She closed 100 million rands worth of transactions. She blocked them, and then said, we need a forensic investigation. Then she gets assassinated, and immediately those transactions are allowed to flow. And no investigation as requested then is pursued. So that shows you that it's internal to the organizations themselves. They silence the internal checks and balances. So it's extremely important that basically the top structures of government, and in many cases where we are looking at what we looked at in state capture, the boards of public entities and the top management who are appointed by those boards, all of them are essentially appointed by members of the executive. And the route through to this capture, as identified in the Zondo report as well, operates through capture of a political party. You capture the political party to capture the governance structures of the state. And then there's enormous amounts of money in all of these organizations. So Gauteng Department of Health is a budget of 65 to 70 billion rand a year, and a huge procurement bill. enormous amounts of opportunity for appointments, etc., and huge patronage. So really, you're capturing a massive piggy bank. And that is the danger. All of our state organization institutions are at risk if you allow for this top-down capture to become systemic and across the board. And it appears so widespread when you look at municipalities, when you look at provincial governments, and when you look at national public entities and all sorts of agencies that have been established in which the boards themselves are manipulated. It's extremely problematic, and it's not sufficient to target one or two bad apples in the system. This is a structural issue that needs to be addressed.
How can that be done? I mean, I think last year as well, we asked the very same questions, Prof, about what more does South Africa need to do. It almost seems or paints a picture that there is a lack of seriousness on the part of those who can do something about this, to put the necessary laws in place. Nobody wakes up wanting to be a whistleblower, but obviously, as you indicated, you've got people like Babita Deokaran who saw something wrong taking place and flagged that. Mpho as well did the very same thing. And there simply doesn't seem to be enough being done. Yet, even after Babita Deokaran, there were more people that were killed. There seems to be a numbness to the plight of what is really taking place here.
When you look at, so it's important to look at the sort of the indicators of the nature of the capture that occurs. Because when you look at how Babita Deokaran's assassination was followed up internally and externally, you see the Hawks did nothing. You see that the Department of Health did nothing. You see that the Gauteng provincial government did nothing. And in many cases, they took action which doesn't appear to be the normal response to an assassination. They did the opposite of what you would regard as normal. Their actions were to hide, to close down. And that suggests how high it is. So to close this gap, essentially we do have to look at exactly what the Zondo Commission reported. Political appointments, the ability of members of the executive to essentially appoint people into key organizations allows for this capture to occur very rapidly, because you basically put your network in place very quickly. We're seeing it across the board. You remove a minister of education who's responsible for doing exactly that, you put another one in, and they do exactly that again. So it repeats. It's the method of capture that occurs. And how we close it, and this is where I would look at the current government and at the president. The Zondo report is there. It is absolutely clear, the system for capture. There has been no effort whatsoever to close any of these loopholes in the way in which political appointments are made into government, and it allows for overnight establishment of networks. In the Gauteng Department of Health, it's worthwhile noting that from 2006, when the first Brian Kongwa was responsible for major corruption, 1.5 billion rands worth of corruption identified in that period and wrecked the Gauteng Department of Health, he still hasn't been prosecuted. And from that period to now, the average tenure of an MEC in the Gauteng Department of Health is 2 years, and the average tenure of a head of department is just under 2 years, which means that every time a new MEC gets appointed, they establish their guy, they put them in. And from there, the networks are established. So this is basically how the capture occurs. And systemically, structurally, we have to remove that ability. And this has to be not only in the provincial governments, it has to be in municipalities, it has to be in municipal public entities, provincial public entities, and national public entities and departments as well. The corruption works exactly the same, whether it's national, provincial, municipal. And what we've seen since the Zondo report is total silence. It's clear that that is the modus operandi. And what we've also seen with Mamazi and the police services is that, in fact, the perpetrators potentially of major corruption in Tembisa Hospital were given major contracts in the South African Police Service. So it extends to there. It appears as though you can close down police investigations through these corrupt networks. So this is the danger. We can't allow the accountability structures of our entire state to be captured in this way. And it really means that we have to scrutinize who gets put in as a commissioner of police, how and basically the vetting of the top structures of everybody, so that you don't allow for collusion, for an alignment of interests between an MEC and a head of department or a commissioner of police, the head of the NPA. All of those structures need to have proper vetting before these people are put in position, and we don't have enough checks and balances on that. We allow for too much discretion in the hands of members of the executive. And what that means is we sit by and watch the corruption and the corrupt people just rotate through the system. And each time a new MEC is appointed, it can even just be changes in faction within a political party that are coming in, put their guys in, and they extract. And there's nothing to stop them, because all parts of the system can be shut down. In the Gauteng Department of Health, just to give you an indication, from 2006, they have had systematic irregular expenditure all the way through from that period to now, identified by the Auditor General, as well as many other contraventions of the Public Finance Management Act. No one has been held to account for non-compliance with the Public Finance Management Act. And this is throughout all the provinces. You see the same pattern. This is in health departments. And in the Gauteng Department of Health, it is structural, it's clearly ongoing, and all of these things are obligations placed on the accounting officers of the Gauteng Department of Health to stop, to prevent. It's not just to deal with it when they see it, but to prevent it from happening going forward. And you see that it is repeated year after year after year with no consequences. And that means that the legislation is entirely ignored. But I want to make one further point that is extremely worrying, is that the contractors that Babita Deokaran identified, and that were clearly identified and made public by News 24, they weren't blacklisted anywhere. And you have to ask why. Why were they not blacklisted by National Treasury? Why were they not blacklisted by government? Why did the machinery just not work? And it suggests that there are potentially that turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and a lot of people at the top of the system don't close this down even when it gets discovered. So really, National Treasury and everybody has a lot to answer for, because they've allowed these characters to continue extracting from the provincial governments and from national departments, despite having been fingered by Babita Deokaran.
And by not being blacklisted, Prof, that simply means that they can continue to receive tenders for other jobs. But before I come back to you, Prof, a little bit earlier on, we did speak to the family of Babita Deokaran. They're calling for the arrest of the mastermind. Let's take a listen to that before we come back to you. Please stay with us for just a moment.
4 years ago, and it was around this time, that it all transpired. And as I'm standing here now, and I realize on that day, there's so many cameras around here, but nothing worked on that day. Why and how, I don't know. Remember, with regards to signal jamming, somebody with authority had signal jammed this radius for that period of time. And now when you look at it, to bring it into perspective, it was well planned and well executed. Nobody wanted her alive, that's for sure.
And Rakesh, we were speaking earlier on, in fact, even during the week, in terms of her memory. How do we keep her memory alive as the family? What are you hoping for now?
So, all we want is for her name not to go in vain. As you stipulated as well, we've been very vocal that there's definitely a mastermind or masterminds involved here. And those are the people that we want. And I've said it previously, and I will reiterate, those 6 guys did not hire themselves. Somebody hired them. So we want to know who hired them. And if you look at the trail, even in this book here, The Shadow State, written by Jeff Wicks, everything is in this book here. So Babita left a trail behind. That trail needs to be followed.
Rakesh, another question, your sister, you were communicating with her. She sent you the last message that she sent you on that morning. Tell the viewers what it was and how that went about.
So that entire Sunday she spent with me at my place, which is not far from here. And that morning at 6:30, I messaged her and asked her if she stopped working. She said, yeah, she just have a sleep, but she'll start again around 9 o'clock. And she never saw 9 o'clock. And that was more hurtful than anything else, because she had absolutely no clue as to what was going to happen.
And maybe when we look, she made sure that she blows the whistle on the corruption at the Tembisa Hospital. When you look at the country now, do you think the country is able to deal with the corruption? And now that she's left the trail, what are you hoping will follow, in terms of fighting corruption, even within perhaps the Department of Health, which is where she was?
So, as it stands at the moment, we are not informed about anything regarding the case itself, right? So it should be the responsibility of either the Hawks or the SIU. Well, the SIU did report that they're wrapping it up, but we don't know what they are wrapping up. And we are hoping that it's a positive outcome from whatever they are wrapping up. Because as I stipulated again, we want the mastermind of masterminds.
Prof, we were just listening to Babita Deokaran's brother speak about, how they're still waiting for the masterminds that they believe were behind her assassination. They're completely in the dark about how far the investigation is at this point. I did see the SIU's advocate Andy Mutibi, who was attending today's remembrance ceremony, which is taking place outside where Babita Deokaran was assassinated. But it's always the small fish that, it seems, are arrested in these matters. The top dogs, never to be found.
Yes, and this is an indication of potentially how far it goes. In essence, when you see the minions get taken down, it's effectively a confession from the top structures, because it's telling you how far it goes, because it's saying there are people who are untouchable. So they will throw some meat at the media and at the processes. But essentially that has to end until we get the top dogs, until we get the criminals at the top of our government system taken down and shown that it is what was a massive mistake to murder somebody like Babita Deokaran or Mpomafolo. Those people basically are precious to South Africa's accountability system, and there must be the highest sanctions for the people involved right up to the top. It doesn't matter where it goes. And if our police structures are being held back, we have to go after that. As a society, we can't let it rest. So yes, there are the bad apples that we need to get to, but we also have to take into account, as I've pointed out before, never forget that what we're seeing is also a consequence of systemic problems, in that the system makes sure that bad apples structurally get to the top of our government system. So they actually crowd out the good apples. They crowd out the people who should be running our public institutions. That is the structural flaw that needs to change. So even if we take down the kingpin behind this, we will have another one down the line, because our systems are not safe. And so we need to correct this. What frustrates me is we're having this so-called national dialogue. This is something that we have to do. It cuts through everything. Nothing can perform if the leadership of all of our public institutions are contaminated and toxic from the beginning. That's the key thing. You can't correct anything in this country. It's not about policies anymore, because the people in those positions don't care about policy. Tembisa Hospital and the Gauteng Department of Health are under financial difficulties and constraints. But nobody stops the billions being removed. And just in one hospital, we're talking about 2.5 billion rand that flowed out of that hospital. There is no indication that any goods and services were provided for that. It was purely a tap that turned and took 2.5 billion rand through one hospital. So that's only one public institution out of many. So think of what's going on all through the country, and people are buying houses in Clifton and massive properties in Waterfall, and all of that from money that should be going into public services, into housing, etc. And until we close it at the top, we're just going to have one more kingpin after another. So there are people also protecting these structural weaknesses. They don't want to change them. So in this case, we have to go after the Babita Deokaran story. We must not stop until we've got everybody involved. Everybody. That includes all the protectors in the provincial government as well, and in the national government, and in the police services, who are part of basically putting a damper on proceeding against this case. As was indicated in Jeff Wicks's analysis, the fact that the laptop wasn't even examined in 7 months, and her cell phone wasn't even examined by the Hawks. They've apparently denied it, but there's no evidence. All the trails are there. If you were a proper investigator, you don't need a Sherlock Holmes to work out there was a reason that she was assassinated, but they never even investigated the key evidence. Now, that was evidence that leaked out of the department because it was available in a laptop that they gave back to the family, who gave it to News 24. But why were they not investigating the systems in the Department of Health itself, which would have had a lot of that information as well? So you have to say, who basically stopped doing their job when it was so obvious that there's a bread trail all the way through to the top people involved? And that is the concern that we have. There are a lot of people involved in this. You need a lot of people to actually not to turn the other way for this kind of protection to happen for the top criminals involved in this particular case. And these are the assassins are truly at the bottom of this. They were activated by people and the perpetrators then subsequently protected.
Prof, you paint a very worrying picture. And I mean, it's not the first time we speak about this, but every time we do, it certainly paints a picture of a deeper crisis that we are in particular when it comes to corruption in South Africa, and how some would go to all lengths or certain extent to ensure that it remains that way. The status quo remains. The corruption does continue. Prof, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on SABC News. Professor Alex van der Heever from the Wits University's School of Governance. Our focus very much today on whistleblowing, as we remember Babita Deokaran, of course, assassinated after blowing the whistle on multi-millions in corruption that was taking place at the Tembisa Hospital. She wasn't the only one that was killed after that. Another whistleblower, Pamela Mabini, as well as Mpho, a forensic auditor in Ekurhuleni, also killed in the wake of trying to uncover some of the despicable acts of corruption that had been taking place in their different areas, simply doing their jobs. So as that commemoration takes place today, much of what we're speaking about is on whistleblowing and why nothing has yet been done sufficiently to protect whistleblowers.